Hello everyone, I'm Sherry from the CGH Health Foundation. Welcome back to my kitchen for another What's Cooking CGH video. So at the end of the summer, I always have tomatoes getting ripe faster than I can eat them, in slices on a sandwich or whatever. And so I'm looking for ways to use up my tomatoes. And today I thought I would show you a recipe for a really quick and easy tomato basil soup. And this can be made with fresh tomatoes, frozen tomatoes, canned tomatoes, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about freezing tomatoes and everything that goes into the soup. So I'm starting off with my pot over medium heat, and I'm going to put in just about a teaspoon of olive oil. Doesn't take very much. And the first thing I'm going to start in the pot is about a cup of chopped onions. This was about a 1 medium onion. And you can hear my pot's nice and hot, so they're sizzling away in here. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. Okay, so we're going to saute the onions and the olive oil for maybe 3 or 4 minutes until they start to look soft and maybe even a little bit golden. So let me tell you about the tomatoes. This recipe you can use, like I said, fresh, frozen, canned tomatoes, and you can really use just any kind of tomato. So I've got 8 cups of chopped tomatoes here, and you can see I've got some just little cherry tomatoes cut in half. I've got some of the regular, big round globe tomatoes. I've even got a few of the more solid kind of paste tomato. So I've got a good variety. This is a good recipe to just kind of use up odds and ends of tomatoes that you have. And so I'm using fresh tomatoes today because that's what I have today. If you have a lot of tomatoes and you want to save them, so this little bag of goodies right here, I read this or saw it somewhere recently about freezing tomatoes, and this was such an easy way to do it. All I did was take my knife and kind of take out the core, the green stem end. I washed the tomatoes first, and then I set them on a baking sheet with some parchment paper and stuck them in the freezer and froze them whole like that. So later on when the weather's cooler and I want to make some fresh tomato soup, I've got tomatoes in the freezer. So that's kind of a handy tip, really easy way to preserve your tomatoes from the summer. I don't do much canning. I do more freezing than anything. So the onions are starting to get a little softer. We'll keep working on those. The other ingredient in this soup, so it's a tomato basil soup, and so I have a big bunch of basil. About a month ago, I did a video about a fresh corn salad, and I used basil in that, and I told you during the video that you can just keep it on the counter like this. So this has been on my counter for a month. It's starting to get roots at the bottom. So if you want to preserve your basil, then that's a great way to do it. Just stick it in a glass of water. I do change the water about once a week, but you can see it has stayed really nice. It's been on my counter, and I can grab a few leaves whenever I want to. Okay, so when the onions start to cook a little bit, they're going to get soft. They start to turn a little bit yellow, and I'm going to move ahead. I'm not quite there yet, but they will continue to cook. The next thing that we're going to put in is some garlic. Now, I have 2 or 3 good-sized cloves of garlic. So the cool thing about this soup is that the measurements don't have to be exact. And if you like more garlic, really garlicky, then by all means put in more garlic. My garlic cloves were really big, so I have 2 of them, and I'm going to use my garlic press, or you can use your knife and just mince it up real fine. And I don't usually add the garlic along with the onion because the garlic tends to cook a little faster, especially if it's real small like this. And you do not want your garlic to burn. That makes it bitter. And you don't want to cook it a whole long time. You kind of just want to add it in there. And when it starts to get fragrant and you can really smell it, then it's good. You're just trying to kind of cook off the raw taste of the garlic. Okay, so 1 medium onion chopped fine, 2 or 3 or 4 cloves of garlic, whatever you like. And once the garlic has had a chance to kind of cook a little bit, and I can smell it. If you were here in my kitchen, you would not believe it. It smells really good. So next go in the tomatoes. I have 8 cups of tomatoes, fresh tomatoes chopped. I'm going to pour them in there. Now, if you want to add additional things, vegetables to this, I have seen recipes where some carrot and some celery cooked along with the onion. That would be a great addition. I was just trying to make the easiest, simplest version of the recipe that I could. So we'll stir that all up, turn it back up on high, and these tomatoes are going to cook until they start to break down and really look soft. So once they start simmering, it'll probably take maybe 5 or 6 minutes for them to really start getting softened. So we'll come back in 5 or 6 minutes. Okay, we are back. So I let the tomatoes come up to a simmer, and they have been cooking away here for about 5 or 6 minutes, and they're looking nice and soft and mushy. So on to the next step, right? At this point, you can take your tomatoes off of the heat, and I'm gonna do that right here. Move this thing out of the way. So here's where we're going to add the last of the ingredients before we do anything more with it. So that basil that I told you about, we're just going to grab a handful, and again, no exact measurements. I'm just going to pull it off of here. I was telling you how to preserve the tomatoes, and you can do the same thing with basil. I don't tend to like dried basil very much. I like my basil more fresh. And in the wintertime, even frozen basil tastes better to me than the dried stuff in the can or the spice jar. So one thing that I like to do is to either make pesto, which is your basil and some olive oil and pine nuts and Parmesan cheese, etc., or just to blend the basil leaves with some water or some olive oil and put it in ice cube trays and freeze it. And then when you make this soup in the middle of the wintertime, you'll be able to take out a frozen chunk of that basil and use it in the soup. And oh my gosh, my kitchen's really smelling good now. Onions and garlic and fresh basil and the tomatoes. The last addition is some pepper and salt. Now, I don't use a whole lot of salt. I've got maybe half a teaspoon of salt, but I have almost a full teaspoon of pepper in here. And that spice from the pepper is going to make up for not being very salty. Plus, I like tomato soup that has a little bit of heat to it. Okay, so I'll stir that in here. So I'm going to blend this soup, and I like using my immersion blender. It's this stick thing that goes right in the pot. If you don't have one of these, then you can transfer this soup into a traditional blender. Be very careful, because with hot liquids, they tend to expand in the blender, so you might have to do it in batches. And even while you're blending, you might want to put a tea towel over the top of the blender and kind of hold on to the lid so things don't come popping out. So I'm going to use my immersion blender, my stick blender, and get my soup all blended together here. Okay, now that took a few minutes to blend because I wanted to make sure I got it nice and smooth, all of those chunks of tomatoes and no great big hunks of basil in there. Tomatoes, I did want to say a little bit about tomatoes because I always get asked the question about whether it's better to eat fresh vegetables or frozen vegetables or canned vegetables. And it kind of depends. Frozen vegetables can be just as healthy as fresh vegetables, especially if they don't have any added sodium or sauces or anything like that. Frozen vegetables are generally picked when they're fresh and ripe and frozen. Canned vegetables are okay. Again, you have to be careful of the sodium in canned vegetables. But they can all be part of a healthy diet. In fact, the more vegetables, the better in whatever form. When it comes to tomatoes, though, the key thing about tomatoes that they have that is healthy for us is a chemical called lycopene. It's a natural chemical that is found in red colored foods. And that lycopene is an antioxidant, meaning that it keeps its cells from becoming damaged or protects them from becoming damaged. And there's even some pretty good research that looks at the effect on tomatoes, cooked tomato consumption on prostate cancer that shows beneficial. But the thing about tomatoes is that cooking them creates more of the lycopene or allows more of the lycopene to be released. So in the case of a tomato, you're better off probably eating cooked tomatoes than raw tomatoes. So that's kind of an interesting fact about tomatoes. Let's serve ourselves a little bit of this delicious smelling tomato soup. Still pretty warm. This will keep for 3 or 4 days, probably in the refrigerator. Again, you can freeze it, but you can eat it right away. And I'm going to take a little taste. Oh, that is really good. Such a quick and easy recipe. You'll never go back to the canned soup again. So by the time that you see this video, we will have a new format or a new location for the What's Cooking blog. So we'll make sure that we put that link in the comments down here. Plus the recipe will be in the video description. And come back and look at all of our recipes on What's Cooking CGH.